Welcome back to the weekend abode, friend. Ain't she a beauty? Well, she's got good bones anyway. Just wish they didn't stick out like that. Rustic charm, Chester says. Well, we'll go with that. Anyway, come on in, friend. The house may have a few holes, but our story tonight is solid. Go on, have yourself a seat. Pipe down, Clarence. I've got a guest here. I don't know if that's his real name or not. It just kind of works. Ooh, it's the Crimson Hour here at the weekend abode, so we better get started. 'Cause when that last lick of light fades away, it's gonna be you, me, Clarence, Chester, and whatever's waiting in these walls for the lights to go out. Our tale tonight is brought to you by one of our very favorite authors, Mario E. Martinez. This one comes from Roadkill, Texas Horror by Texas Writers No. 9, an excellent collection of fiction, which we'll discuss more after the story. So without further delay, from author Mario E. Martinez, I give you Promises, Promises. It was beautiful at first. Alicia and Joaquin made all the preparations. They'd written their notes and put post-its on everything, so there'd be no confusion or fighting over their stuff. They tidied the house, mowed the lawn, and even fertilized it so when people came, they wouldn't make assumptions about their decision. They even turned their cupboards over to a local food bank. Together, they drove to the ranch outside of Dodd and up to Joaquin's family house. It was a cabin with big windows overlooking a pond. On the cement porch, they had often watched the sunset play at colors on the cloud smears above. On that porch months ago, Joaquin first proposed the idea. After they arrived and they went out to a little shed to collect a pick and shovel, Joaquin thought it was funny that Alicia kept stomping and kicking the walls to scare away spiders.
Well, I don't want to die in here,
she said. The spot they chose was in the back pastures near the banks of what his family called Ghost Lake, because sometimes it was there and other times it wasn't. When they unloaded their tools, the water line was high enough to cover the roots of nearby willows, and a siege of herons waded through the mud on the opposite bank. Alicia stood looking at the wind-rippled water and inhaled the scent kicked up by the warm breeze. She thought she could look at the lake forever, and smiled, knowing in a way she would. Joaquin came up behind her, wrapped one arm around her waist and kissed her neck. Goosebumps rose on her arms. She giggled. Perfect, isn't it? He asked.
Just like you promised,
said Alicia. Joaquin brought his other arm around and drove the tip of the shovel into the ground. Alicia playfully frowned and squeezed his arm.
Just a little longer,
she said. He kissed her. Okay, I'll start, but don't dawdle. A promise is a promise. It's getting hotter and we've got to finish before dinner. Joaquin left the shovel with Alicia and got the pick from the ground and started breaking the hard earth. Digging their graves was tough business. The first foot of earth was mostly roots, and the pick and shovel couldn't get more than an inch in the ground before the little hair-like roots banded together to stop them. The next layer was worse. Seeing all the greenery around the lake gave them the illusion of soft dirt that could be cut like cake. But it was South Texas, and the soil beneath that first layer was mostly clay and pebbles, which slowed them further. Once one grave was deep enough, Joaquin laid down in it to see where it had to be widened. They were slower digging the second grave because their limbs were heavy from digging the first. They almost missed that last sunset, and the little they saw of it was from inside Alicia's grave. Dinner was rushed. The steaks were too rare for Alicia, and the wine too warm. She didn't say anything because Joaquin was so happy. It was close now, and that seemed to make him appreciate the myoglobin leaking from his steak and the bitter char on the spears of asparagus. He kept toasting to things because he knew that after tomorrow, there'd be nothing left to toast to. Joaquin drank to the sun, to the air, to time and the stars, to finding someone to walk through oblivion with and meld into the universe together. The way he talked about dying, Alicia felt as if tomorrow wasn't going to be the end of anything. It was just going to be stepping through a doorway into a new phase of their lives. That night, they made love like it was the last time because it was. Joaquin finished. Alicia didn't. At sunrise, they dressed for the grave. They shared the bathroom, alternating at the lone mirror, adjusting one another's clothing. Joaquin tied the ribbons on the back of Alicia's dress, and Alicia fixed Joaquin's tie. He placed the .38 between them in the truck cab like it was a child. The day was bright and warm, and a sedge of sandhill cranes made throaty calls as they glided across the sky. At the side, in the shade of trees, Alicia spotted butterflies lighting onto dewy flowers. She held Joaquin's hand and he squeezed it. Joaquin got out of the truck with the revolver in his hand. He hopped eagerly into his grave and handed the gun to Alicia. They decided the order weeks ago, and at the time Alicia had thought it romantic Joaquin wanted to go first. "I don't want to live a single solitary second without you," he said. But holding the gun and feeling its weight, Alicia stared at it. Seeing her hesitation, Joaquin beckoned her with both hands, almost like a child asking to be picked up by his mother. Alicia went to him and knelt. Joaquin took her hands and kissed them. "It's time," he said. "I know you're nervous. Lots of people are afraid of where we're going, but that's because they're going alone. Us? We decided this. And as scary as the next place seems, we're going together." Joaquin's eyes were so earnest, his smile so sincere, that Alicia nodded, and so did he. "They'll call us cowards," he said, placing her hands around the gun handle. He pushed the hammer back for her and kissed her hands again. "But you're doing a brave thing, sweetheart." He guided her hands and rested the gun barrel to his forehead. A sudden idea popped into his head. He readjusted himself in the grave and tried to work out the trajectory of his fall. Satisfied, he put his forehead to the muzzle again. "Ready?" Alicia nodded. Joaquin took a deep breath, scanned the sky, and looked at Alicia's face. "I'll be waiting on the other side," he said, closing his eyes. He nodded. He was ready. But as Alicia steadied herself to pull the trigger, Joaquin's eyes shot open. He managed to say, "Oh, wait!" But the bullet screaming out of the barrel deafened Alicia and punched a thought right out of the back of Joaquin's head. The instant the .38 went off, Alicia saw a nimbus of blood mist out of Joaquin, and he went cross-eyed before his body dropped. He didn't fall backward as he thought, but instead collapsed like a demolished building until his frame accordioned, and he lengthened like a worm on the grave floor. Deaf, Alicia knelt there for a long time. Joaquin's eyes were open, the gore leaking from his head soaked into the ground. Alicia was amazed the flies already smelled death and danced above the grave. She cried. Her tears were complicated. She loved Joaquin and death hadn't changed that, and though she was repulsed at killing him, Alicia understood Joaquin had been unfit for this world. Others might call it murder, but Joaquin would call it setting him free. He was sure to put that in his note. Alicia let her tears finish. She got into her grave and chuckled in a helpless way, because she was careful not to get hurt or soil her dress when she would shoot herself in a few moments. Like Joaquin, she took a last look at the sky and the land, took in its aroma. She even ran her hand over the pebbly sides of the grave. She listened to the cranes. Unlike Joaquin, Alicia knew she wasn't going to fall back like a man shot in a western, and sat at the bottom of her grave and tried to think of how to shoot herself. Holding the gun to her forehead was awkward, and made her afraid she'd do it wrong and die slow, a vegetable that planted herself. She decided the best way would be to put the gun in her mouth. Alicia had no last words because even if she did, no one was around to hear them. She closed her eyes. Her finger rested on the trigger, and Alicia put the slightest pressure on it. Something tickled her nose and her eyes opened, spooking a fly. It went off and returned until Alicia swatted it away. She put the gun in her mouth again, but the fly returned to kiss her. Alicia stood, cursing, and chased the fly away.
Give me a second and then do your worst,
she said, looking around for more. There were a bunch bouncing around Joaquin's grave, and Alicia looked beyond their graves to the nearby trees. A committee of vultures waited in the branches. They exchanged glances, and as if struck by lightning, Alicia realized that for all their romantic talk and all their planning, they hadn't thought of who would bury them. She looked at the vultures, at their beaks, and imagined them tearing through her dress to dot her body with stink and oily bird shit.
God damn it,
she said, getting out of the hole, and retrieved the shovel to bury Joaquin. Alicia thought burying Joaquin would be easy, but first she had to get in his grave with him and lay him out properly. His dead weight was cumbersome. By the time Alicia laid him out and crossed his arms over his chest, her hands were caked with bloody dirt, one of her heels had broken off, and her hair was mostly slick, stuck to her forehead. Getting out of his grave was difficult because Alicia convinced herself using Joaquin as a step stool would be disrespectful. The flies were another thing. Where the vultures waited in the trees, the flies were bold and clumped onto Joaquin, and the gore beneath him. Alicia tried to kill them, but they were too fast. Alicia got the shovel and sunk it into the dirt. She hefted a quantity of earth and gently dropped it into the grave. The flies got spooked and fled to her, and she swatted them away until they settled on Joaquin again. Learning their habits, Alicia almost made a game of it. She waited for the flies to settle, and then threw dirt on them quick, going to the dirt pile and back as fast as she could. Each time she found a sick joy that less and less flies escaped the hole. Before long, Alicia took the shovel to the shade of the willow and let her breathing settle. The lake was fragrant, and faint ripples lapped at the shore. The calls of the sandhill cranes sounded otherworldly, deep and resonant, like dragon snores. And when Alicia looked for the sedge, she saw Joaquin standing on the lake. He was dressed in his death clothes, and a pinprick of light shined through the hole in the center of his forehead. There was no anger in his expression, just languid excitement. He beckoned her with one hand, as if inviting her into a Ferris wheel gondola. He mouthed her name. Taking up the shovel, she said,
"Okay,"
and got back to it. After the better part of an hour, Joaquin was buried and Alicia found some rocks to mark the grave. Alicia looked back out to the lake. Joaquin stood there like a mirage. She nodded to him, and he to her. She got into her grave again and was a moment preparing herself. There was no place to dry her sweaty hair or her slick hands, so she did so on the back of her dress, which she then slap-dusted and straightened. Alicia got to 38 again and sat on her grave bottom, and stretched out her legs and then quickly retracted them. Her legs were tight and uncomfortable, and the dust sticking to the back of her knees didn't help. She bent her legs and pulled the hammer back. As before, she looked at the blue of the sky and a single cloud drifting past her tomb's mouth, and took a long inhale of air, savoring it, before picking up the pistol and sticking the muzzle into her mouth. Joaquin peeked into the grave. The sky behind him rendered him a silhouette, the hole in his head like a bindi of light.
I'm right behind you,
she mumbled against the muzzle, resting her finger on the trigger. The gun trembled. The digging yesterday and all the burying made her arms weak, her shoulders sore, and conjured a deep rumble in her stomach. She laughed at how loud it was.
I'm going to leave that behind,
she thought.
No hunger, no thirst, no nothing.
She closed her eyes, and the deep emptiness in her stomach grew sharp, painful. Her eyes opened and she took the pistol out of her mouth. She sighed. The grave was already dug, and she thought, to the dead, what was another few hours? She climbed out of the grave and dusted herself off.
If today's my last day, I don't want to be hungry for it,
she said, turning to the truck. Joaquin stood between it and Alicia. His forehead was creased, puckering his wound.
I'll be right back,
she explained, and went to the truck.
We've got eternity, and it's only a couple of miles into town. We'll be together by sunset.
She put the gun in the glove compartment and found the keys in the cup holder. Alicia turned on the truck and set the AC to high. It was blow-dryer hot at first, but she still pointed all the vents at her face and let the air dry her skin. Alicia turned on the radio and found the local station. She'd never really cared for cumbia, but the beat had her keeping time on the steering wheel anyway. She put the truck in gear and looked out the window at Joaquin. He pointed at her grave.
A promise is a promise,
she told him.
I'm just getting something to eat. No sense meeting eternity cranky.
Joaquin ordered her to come back, but she couldn't hear him. The AC was roaring. The tires crunched the road, and Alicia had turned the music up as loud as it would go. Alicia stopped at a diner called Jean's Feed Barn and got a window booth. She ignored all the stares from the townies. Alicia knew she was in a soiled dress and Joaquin's discarded sneakers. When the waitress came to give her a menu, Alicia didn't even look at it.
Y'all got cheeseburgers? This is America,
the waitress said. Alicia nodded.
A cheeseburger, and the bacon you put on it. 2 pieces, thick cut. That'll be great,
Alicia said, smiling.
How do you want it cooked? A little blood's fine. I just don't want it kicking. Get me some onion rings, too. Instead of fries? In addition to,
Alicia corrected her.
Drink? Zap Cola. Extra ice,
Alicia said.
It's hot out there. It's hot in here, too,
the waitress said, going to the back. Alicia wasn't sure what that meant, but she paid the words little attention. She looked around. The register sat on a display counter full of candy, and behind it was a corkboard decorated with town notices and old calendars. Beside it was a tall cake display with pieces of pie and cake revolving on little platforms. She watched it and tried to decide which one she wanted. Alicia was met with a familiar face when she turned back around. Joaquin sat with a little of the diner showing through the hole in his head. Alicia grinned at him and said,
Hey, darling.
A man seated in the next booth looked over his shoulder. Alicia waved at him in apology.
Not you. Sorry.
You don't seem like you're in much of a hurry, Joaquin told her. Alicia looked at the reflection in the window in hopes of seeing the back of Joaquin's head, but dead he cast no reflection. His eyebrows went up as they had in life when he scolded her without words. Shrugging, she said,
I just ordered. I can't go to the window and demand they make it snappy because I've got dying to do, now can I? They'd commit me, and you'd just have to wait longer.
I suppose you're right, Joaquin said. Are you getting dessert?
For my last meal?
Alicia said, scoffing.
Hell yes.
She caught an old couple looking at her and she winked at them. The waitress returned with Alicia's Zap Cola. The glass barely tapped the table before Alicia took it up and drank 3 hearty gulps. She gave out a satisfied exhalation at the cold fizz and jolt of caffeine.
That's good,
she told the waitress.
Hey, which is better?
She pointed at the dessert case with her thumb.
It's between the cherry and the pecan. Pecan's the best seller.
Alicia hummed and thought.
You know what? I'll get a slice of both. Could you bring them once I'm all done?
Riding, the waitress nodded.
Want ice cream on those?
Alicia looked at Joaquin and said,
Oh, to hell with it. Let's do it. Life's short.
Walking off, the waitress said,
Atta girl.
Alicia waited for the waitress to leave before speaking again. She ran her knuckles up and down the sides of her sweating glass, drawing scribbled nothings that the cold drink made vanish like invisible ink.
Don't be mad.
Joaquin sighed. I'm not mad. I'm dead.
What's it like? Death?
Lonely, Joaquin said, narrowing his eyes.
Not for long. I told you. I'm right behind. Oh, the food's coming.
The waitress came and placed 2 paper-lined baskets of food on the table. One held a hearty burger with curled tongues of bacon peeking out from the bun, all atop a bed of crinkle-cut fries. The other basket almost overflowed with onion rings. The waitress took a ketchup bottle from her apron pocket, placed it on the table, and was gone. Alicia reached for the ketchup but stopped herself.
Let's see how the chef wanted it to taste,
she said, hefting the burger with both hands. Even dead, Joaquin's expression changed when Alicia took the biggest bite she could and worked the food around her mouth and chewed until she could finally swallow.
Now this is what I was waiting for,
she said, placing the burger upside down on the wax paper. She ate a fry and stuck the next in her mouth like a cigarette as she worked the top off the ketchup bottle before pounding out a few dollops. Her bites alternated between burger and fries and onion rings, and each gulp of her soda had her saying,
Man, oh man,
before she went back to eating. As she ate, a fly landed on the table and went about kissing it in patterns that only its sand-grained brain could detect. Alicia tried to wave it away, but the fly was used to people and went on kissing the table. Alicia watched it like dinner theater. Someone passed her table and still the fly did no more than taste the formica. Watching flies now, are we? Joaquin asked. Alicia made a face at him.
It's interesting. It doesn't fly away or anything. It makes me wonder how long it's been here that people don't bother it. And that made me wonder how many generations of flies came before it. Stuff like that.
And that's interesting to you? Alicia munched on her fries.
It's not to you?
At the moment, I've got other things to think about, like being dead and alone, and the woman I love, who swore I'd be here with her, is stalling for time with a cheeseburger and philosophical musings about a podunk fly with people skills.
Don't forget about the pieces of pie,
Alicia reminded him. How could I? Maybe it's the hole in my head. The one you put there?
At your request.
At our agreement, he corrected. After a few seconds, Alicia said,
I can't believe we didn't think about who'd bury us. Seems like an important part, right?
Yes, it was a bit of an oversight, he admitted. Our bodies were the problem. I didn't care much about our remains. Joaquin frowned because it seemed like Alicia had stopped listening. She held her burger away from her face and watched the fly walk across the table, tasting and testing and moving on.
I know I've got the food, but I think it'll go to you first,
she said. Seeing his face, she went on.
It's just, if we were outside, then I'd say me, because flies smell the food, but in here, everything smells like this, so maybe he goes to you.
Because I'm dead, he said. Alicia sighed and opened her mouth to speak, but the waitress returned with an unprompted refill.
You ready for those pies? Yes, ma'am,
Alicia replied. The waitress stopped mid-turn to the dessert case.
Who've you been talking to?
Alicia looked at Joaquin and said,
My dead boyfriend.
Didn't make it to husband, huh?
Joaquin glared at the waitress. Alicia raised her eyebrows at Joaquin.
No, we didn't get there.
When'd he pass?
Alicia chuckled.
This morning. I shot him in the head and buried him out on a ranch.
The waitress laughed.
Well, if he wants some company, I've got a prime candidate getting drunk on my couch.
She wrote out the ticket, tore it from the pad, and put it on the table, saying,
My condolences. The pies are on the house.
The fly didn't move. Alicia watched the woman walk away and set to finishing her onion rings. They were soggy with grease, but that delighted her. You're not going to do it, are you? Joaquin asked. Alicia's face softened. She put out her hand for his, but it just passed through Joaquin's.
Of course I am. I'm just waiting on 2 pieces of pie.
With ice cream.
With ice cream.
Joaquin remained even after his body was nothing but dusty bones in the earth. Ghost Lake had filled and dried and filled again in cycles for more years than Joaquin could recall, because time and its nuances meant very little to the dead. The sandhill cranes were back, croaking and circling the lake with necks outstretched. Joaquin's gaze followed them across the sky, and would have done so for the rest of their flight if not for the dust cloud. He watched the dust go from the main road deeper into the ranch until up the path to the lake, a truck came into view. It stopped a few yards away. The driver was in his late 40s. Joaquin grinned at him in a lazy way. He had seen this man grow from a child after all. The driver went to the other side of the truck and opened the door for an old woman. He helped her out, surveyed the land, and told her something before getting back in the truck. The old woman carried flowers and hobbled to Joaquin's grave. Even with decades on her old frame, Joaquin recognized glimmers of his Alicia, the shape of her eyes, the gentle turn of her smile, and waved at her. He had long since given up anger. Do I see some gray on the boy? Joaquin asked. Alicia knelt best she could to put the flowers on the dusty pile of rocks.
He's getting old. We all are.
Well, some of us, Joaquin said, grinning. Alicia nodded.
This place still scares him, though. I thought it would clear up with age, but he thinks it's creepy. Like there's someone he can't see watching him.
I could go whisper in his ear, Joaquin offered. Alicia giggled at the thought.
Then I'd have 2 people to visit out here.
She stood beside Joaquin, and together they looked at the lake and the cranes gathered there.
I'm traveling next month. Asia. First Japan, then Hong Kong, and last Korea. I've never been so...
Joaquin looked at her warmly. We will have so much to talk about when you join me. Whenever that is. A whole lifetime of things.
You hoping for sooner or later?
Time doesn't really mean anything anymore.
Well, it's probably sooner. No bullets. Just old age. I wonder what I'll look like to you then. A young woman or an old maid.
"You'll look like Alicia," Joaquin reasoned. She didn't disagree. They stood side by side, each to their worlds, and watched the cranes doze in the sun or lightly step across the muddy banks. After a while, Alicia's son called her. It was hot, and she had no hat.
"I'll see you sooner than you think,"
she told Joaquin. He smiled. "Promises, promises." And that was Promises, Promises by our pal Mario E. Martinez. Again, this one comes from Roadkill, Texas Horror by Texas Writers 9, the 9th edition of the long-standing series beginning back in 2016 and still going strong today. This one's available in Kindle, print, and audio, narrated by our pal Jason Crum, who you've heard on this channel. Check out the show notes for a link to this book. We appreciate it. A little about the author. Mario E. Martinez writes weird stories in South Texas, giggity, where he lives and teaches. He has written novels Ash Tree and Neo Laredo, short story collections, San Casimiro, Texas, and The Pig Named Orinius, and other strange tales. And most recently, The Chickens That Are Not Her Chickens. Thanks, Mario. The Crimson Hour is a production of the Sinister Somnolence Network. All narration and audio production by yours truly. Co-produced by Geoff Sturtevant. You can follow me on Facebook for news and upcoming releases on both this show and Drew Blood's Dark Tales, my Friday night show on Chillin' Tales for Dark Nights. I hope to see you there too. But hey, while we're here, please hit all those obligatory buttons and share if you don't mind. We'd really appreciate it. The Crimson Hour is accepting submissions. If you've got a story or two you'd like to be featured on this show, send it to drewbloodhorror@gmail.com. If selected, you'll get the full treatment. Well, the Crimson Hour's over, and you know what that means. Things are about to get dark around here. So thanks again for joining me tonight. Remember, if you'd be so kind as to add a review to Apple Podcasts, I'll make sure to shout it out on the show. And if you're here on YouTube, feel free to like, subscribe, and say hi below. But with that, it's time for an Irish goodbye. Clarence gets a little ornery after dark. And I'll see you all next time at the Crimson Hour. Good night, y'all.